Friends, I am V.K. Tripathi. In this series, Quest for Freedom, we have been talking about the evolution of modern science starting from steam engine and through the diesel engine and its impact on society. And the basic purpose of this entire series has been to view these developments objectively, detach yourself from the country of your origin, from the institution where you work, see them objectively. Actually, we are related to the entire human civilization because we have sensitivity, and sensitivity connects you to everybody. So just look at the good and bad impacts of science on people of different nationalities, different regions. We have been talking about the big machines that the science prompted. We also have been talking about the big weapons that the science produced, and as a result, colonization of the world of many countries of the world took place. And the contrast we have seen that in many countries, or especially the European countries where industrialization was taking place, they were enjoying the excitement of science, new discoveries, new inventions, new machines, large scale production and so on. Whereas the third world countries, or rather the countries in Africa and Asia and South America, those countries were being subjugated by force, coercion, and their resources were being exploited. So that was the scenario. Today I would like to talk to you specifically about big machines versus the small machine, and big warfare versus the non-violence. Big machine essentially has four appetites, four hungers. It requires iron for manufacturing the machine. It requires fuel to run the machine. It requires raw material for production, and it requires market for sale of finished products. These are the four things. And because it comes in competition, or rather it saw itself in competition with the indigenous industries of the Asian and African countries, and it also saw that their resources are needed for their machines, big machines or mills, and consequently these industrialized nations, for the sake of their big machines, colonized the poor nations, and the result was that their cottage industry vanished or declined, and a lot of people became out of job, and that led to starvation. But what happened in the 19th century, and especially later on in the 20th century, that science, especially the electricity and magnetism, came out with a small motor, electrical motor, and that gave boost to intermediate scale industry or a small machine. A big cloth mill would require huge investment. It will employ thousands of people, but a small power loom will require a smaller investment, much smaller investment that many people can afford, and it will be requiring, or it will employ maybe one or two people. So that is a big difference, that the centralized production can be replaced by decentralized production. And the small machine has two advantages. Number one, it can provide job to larger number of people, and then secondly, it removes the monopoly of the big mill. These are the big textile mills in England that motivated the British rule in India to vanish cottage industry. But the big machine doesn't have that kind of challenge. So I think this is a very big difference, that a smaller machine that employs fewer people, that requires a smaller investment, will decentralize production, and that would give rise to employment to a larger number of people. So I think a very important development through science came in the development of a small motor, a small machine. And today in India, for instance, 70% or more clothes in our country is produced by power loom, which is a decentralized small machine. So that is one area, but then this percolated down to all different segments of economic activity. So I think there are still many areas where big machines are being used. In some areas, they cannot be replaced. For instance, if you want to make a tunnel, you require a big machine. If you want to produce iron, you require a big machine. If you want to big machines, then to make machines, you require a bigger machine. So there are certain areas where heavy machines or big machines are unavoidable, and they should be built and they should be promoted. However, the major employment will not come through big industry. Major employment will come through a small scale industry. So that's the smaller machine has to be more efficient, cheaper, just like computer. Now computer at one point of time was very expensive. It was a centralized machine and very expensive. But now PC, laptop, individuals can have. They are affordable in cost wise, and they are also can be personal. An individual can work on it. So I think this is the kind of evolution of science that has become very fruitful and useful. So I think this must be promoted in all endeavors of economic activity as well as academic activity or research activity also. As far as warfare is concerned, normally people talk that people fight in the name of ethnicity, people fight in the name of religion, people fight in the name of caste. That has been there. But in last 250 years of modern science, I think all wars have been motivated by imperialist motives, economic motives to exploit, to ruthlessly exploit. That has been the main force, and the imperialist powers or the colonizing powers essentially used this division, racial division, religious division or social division, to divide people and perpetuate their authority and exploitation. So I think we should not lose sight from this fact that all warfare in major warfare in last 250 years has been driven by imperialist notions. I will give you an example. When British ruled India, between 1914 and 1921, in the span of 7 years, that was essentially, much part of this was First World War. And Indian soldiers, about 13 lakhs, 1.3 million Indian soldiers were deployed by the British in different countries, and 74,000 soldiers were killed in that war. And their names are there on India Gate in Delhi. That was the warfare, not for the sake of Indian masses. It was the warfare to serve the interest of the colonial power, the British authority. And if you look at the wars India fought after independence with its neighbors, Chinese war in 1962 and 4 wars with Pakistan, if you just sum up all the casualties in these wars, total number of Indian soldiers killed turns out to be about 11,000, 12,000. So there is a distinction between the imperialist war and the wars, low-scale war between 2 neighboring countries. So in comparison to these wars, the imperialist wars were more devastating, involving much larger number of casualties and causing hunger, famine. One thing more, in 1971 India fought war with Pakistan over Bangladesh. That was a decisive war because a new country was created through the war. Afterwards, there has been hardly any war which has been decisive. Even Soviet Union, when they occupied Afghanistan, they had to go back. America was involved in war with Vietnam, but they had to go back. All major wars, or all wars I would say, after 1971 have not been decisive. And consequently, wars are not a solution to any nation. And especially the developing nations, when they are engaged in their war or they create some war euphoria, warmongering, it is hardly for conquering the neighboring country, but primarily to get political points over their opponents, domestic opponents. So it's a political ploy to garner votes by arousing passions. So this is the scenario. Now what I'm trying to tell here is, I'm essentially addressing at the moment the science students, science professors, the researchers, and responsible people, educated people living in India as well as abroad, and arise in particular living in the West and in America. I want to urge them to view this, that if you are working on a project to develop weapons or warfare, you may think a little more seriously. I know I have also been involved in research projects. At that time I did not know that they were having defense motives, but now when I review what I did, what kind of projects I worked on, I think they had some linkage to defense. So scientists have their limitations because they have to work, they have to survive in this world. So whatever project you are doing directly or indirectly, it may be related to defense or warfare. But as far as carrying the arrogance that I have developed this weapon, I will teach a lesson to a particular nation, to a particular religion, or people of particular religion or a particular community. This arrogance and this hatred must melt, must come down. Because the person whom we think different on the basis of religion or nationality or race, these are all superfluous labels. There is no distinction between you and your projected enemy. They are same. You are same. Just please look into this fallacy of our thought process, and by developing more sophisticated, more effective weapons. We are not serving the nation, we are not serving humanity. So please don't carry this arrogance and don't carry this anger, this hatred, and I think that's the root cause of all violence. Instead, at the time when diesel engine was evolving in 1898, a few years prior to that, Gandhi went to South Africa. He was concerned about the racial discrimination against Indians. So he tried to involve a non-violent mode of struggle. In 1906, a year after Albert Einstein came out with the special theory of relativity, and in that he came out with the relation E equal to mc square, where E is the energy, m is the mass. So when energy-mass relationship Einstein formulated, and that eventually led to the making of atom bomb, the same principle was employed there. So a year after Einstein's formulation of a special theory of relativity, Gandhi came out with the concept of satyagraha, non-violent resistance against a unjust law of a very forceful, very powerful government, British ruling in South Africa. It was a very strong power, a big power, and Gandhi, with his supporters, which were hardly educated, mostly the working class workers, many of them were girls. So resource-wise, intelligence-wise, education-wise, muscle power-wise, they were much weaker. But Gandhi stood. So Gandhi developed the doctrine, and later on he practiced that doctrine in India against the British colonial rule. So I think in the 19th century, starting from end of 19th century, in the 20th century, India developed the doctrine of non-violent resistance against the state. The basic premise here is, and which I think is a great alternative to warfare, and science must must view this very closely. The reason has been that scientists so far on major issues have been subservient to their employers, the governments who pay them salaries. They never bothered that the machines they build, the weapons they build, if they are used against helpless, unarmed people or against innocent people, then they should oppose it. But very rarely scientists have, as a class, have shown that courage. But Gandhi presents a scenario that, please, if your actions bring miseries to innocents, they cause sufferings and exploitation of innocents, then refrain from such actions, raise your voice. And I think scientists can play a great deal. In 1991, when there was conflict between Iraq and Kuwait, America invaded, with the help of 28 countries, invaded Iraq. The bombs were falling on civilian areas, on hospitals. Innocent people were getting killed. So I made an appeal to some scientists that please make an appeal to American state to desist from carpet bombing. Some professors supported my views, but as a class, there was hardly any voice or any movement of this sort. And then onwards, you can see what happened in Iraq. So I think scientists have to still awaken and move a step ahead in that direction. I think in our subsequent episodes, we shall look into the issue of non-violent activism as well. Thank you.